안녕하십니까. 오늘 아침에도 이른 아침에 이렇게 많이 나와주셔서 대단히 감사합니다. 그러면 아침 회의를 곧 시작하도록 하겠습니다. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend my warm welcome to all of you here this morning. It's needless to say, the U.S. and Japan are the most important countries in our region. Now, more than ever, because U.S. is led by President Donald Trump, who is not well known as yet, except he's quite unpredictable. And Japan is under Prime Minister Abe. With his very strong political support and popularity, I suppose he has full of agenda. We are very fortunate this morning with two worldly renowned and distinguished scholars in political science and economics, who happen to know this region, and Japan in particular, know so well. And in fact, they spent so many years doing research and teaching in this region, particularly in Japan, actually Korea as well. So I'm sure they will enlighten us what's going on in the United States and Japan nowadays, and what are major implications for Korea and this region. Since we have two distinguished speakers, I don't think I should waste any time, so that we'll have more time to sharing their views. This morning, I asked Dr. Song Kyung-jin, who is president of Institute for Global Economics, to introduce our speakers and preside at this morning's meeting. I'm sure she will introduce you details of our speakers and proceed with the meeting. Before doing that, I just want to say that Mr. Mark Nepper, who is acting U.S. ambassador, is with us, because there are many distinguished participants, but I don't think I will recognize them all. Well, with this, why don't we invite the speakers and Dr. Song to go ahead with the session. Please.
Thank you, Chairman Sagong. I have the pleasure to introduce these two distinguished scholars, professors Hugh Patrick and Gerald Curtis. I don't think I need a long introduction to this audience, but especially for those who are new to our forum, let me just make a very brief introduction of these two distinguished scholars. I know I'm not going to do enough justice by making a short introduction, but nonetheless, Professor Hugh Patrick is director of Center on Japanese Economy and Business and co-director of Columbia's APEC Center, and R.D. Calkins, professor of international business, emeritus at Columbia. Before he came to Columbia in 1984, he also taught economics at Yale University. And he has written 16 books and some 60 articles and essays on Japan. And his research on Japan includes macroeconomic performance and policy, banking and financial markets, and government-business relations, and the U.S.-Japan relations. For his outstanding work, the government of Japan awarded Professor Hugh Patrick the Order of Sacred Treasure, Gold and Silver Star. And of course, he speaks a very fluent Japanese. And Professor Gerald Curtis is Burgess Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Columbia and former director of Whitehead, Columbia's Whitehead Institute, East Asian Institute, and also he's a fellow, distinguished fellow at the Tokyo Foundation. And Professor Curtis has written numerous books and articles in both English and Japanese, and his books have been translated into many different languages, including Korean, Chinese, Japanese, among others. And he also writes for various international newspapers, including the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Asahi Shimbun, and many other esteemed newspapers and journals around the globe. And Professor Curtis is also the recipient of numerous prizes and honors, including the Order of Rising Sun, Gold and Silver Star, by the Emperor of Japan, which is one of the highest honors bestowed by the government of Japan. And he has held appointments at various institutions, including the Chatham House, the Collège de France, and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore, and Tokyo University, Waseda University, and Keio University. And both Professors Hugh Patrick and Gerald Curtis have served as key players in various Japan-related government and academic societies. With that, I'd like to invite Professor Hugh Patrick to speak about the Japanese economy and its implications for Korea and the East Asian countries.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. And I'm very glad to be here again. I'm a kind of a long-term amateur observer of Korea and the Korean economy. And so I'm here basically to learn from other people, but I understand I have to pay for my visit. It's not a financial issue, it's a question of kind of exchanging of ideas. And so I'm going to talk today about Japan's economic challenges and prospects. One of my dilemmas is that I think you all already know a lot about the Japanese economy. And you know, of course, that in a sense, the Korean economy structure and problems are quite similar to those of Japan, with maybe a 10 to 20 year time lag. So there's, as for Korea particularly, I think it's really important to learn how the mistakes Japan makes as well as the things it does well as in its last 20 years and even longer. I have just come from 3.5 weeks in Japan, including 3 nights in Miyazaki City in Kyushu. And there I was able to meet with several local companies, strong local companies. Both in my stay in Tokyo and in Miyazaki and elsewhere, I came away with the sense that the Japanese economy not only is fundamentally strong, it's doing pretty well. The growth rate is sustained. Industrial production has finally surpassed its peak in 2008. But as you know, the financial crisis hit Japan, like Korea and other countries, pretty well. And the unemployment rate is amazingly low, 2.8%. One problem is that price stability, which I define, and I think the government of Japan defines as a 2% annual rise in the consumer price index, CPI, has not been achieved, and it will take a long time, I think, for it to be achieved. But the good news is I think that the deflationary mindset of Japanese is finally being broken. I found it really interesting that when the Yamato Express delivery company recently announced that it was going to raise prices for the first time in 26 years, this was big news in Japan. You would not think price increases would be a big news, but it basically was a signal for to other companies that they too could start raising prices. And fundamentally, not big increases, but creating an atmosphere in which price increases is normal part of the adjustment process is a major change. And so I think Japan is finally reaching the stage of being able to move in a more normal path when you have full employment with some labor tightness, some wage increases, and some productivity adjustment. Like all countries, Japan faces both major international and domestic challenges. Most of the international changes are due to the increasingly complex global and regional geopolitical environment. In my view, the international economic system is strong, effectively market-based, and has been able to absorb the rise of the Chinese economy and indeed of other changes in the international political system, Brexit in Europe, even the Middle East mess, and of course now we have the dramatic increase in North Korean nuclear weapons and missiles. This is the international environment Japan faces and can't do much about. And if you have questions about it, please ask Jerry. But really, Japan's major challenges are domestic. And of course, the most obvious long-run one is demography, as indicated by Japan's aging and decreasing population. I'm going to say something more about that in just a moment. The second major challenge is how to increase labor productivity and how to achieve good growth. And that's the most difficult and comprehensive of the three objectives of Abenomics, especially since it relies so much on private sector response and involvement, not just the government. A third challenge is to prepare for inevitable natural disasters, ranging from typhoons and other weather-related disasters to a major earthquake. There is a significant probability that in the Tokyo area, Tokyo will be subjected to a major earthquake sometime in the next 30 years. Most Japanese I know in Tokyo respond by having a few extra days of food and water supplied at home, but then basically shrug their shoulders and hope it won't happen in their lifetime. That may be probably how the people in California are behaving too, because same fault line. So, as I just said, Japan's most important challenge over the longer run is its declining and aging population and continuing low fertility rates. This is not a new issue, and really it's an issue more of the future than it is of now. Japan's population is declining today because of two fundamental Japanese values. One is the value that at the family level of aiming for 2 children. And that seems to be very widespread now as a target. And as a result, the fertility is below 2. And the other, of course, holding down domestic population is the very low acceptance of immigrants as permanent residents. This is not new. Fertility has been below the replacement area target of a number of little over 2 of 2 ever since 1974. My expectation is that the current young generation will maintain a low fertility rate, and that their children, many of them unborn, will also maintain a low fertility rate. And that the question is then whether their grandchildren will aim for 3 children instead of 2. And that's so far ahead of us, I don't think there's any way to do other than just acknowledge that's the way it's going to be. So it's clear that Japanese population will gradually decline for at least the next 30 years. When we talk about immigration, we have to distinguish between guest workers and those who move to Japan permanently. Japan is increasing the number of foreign guest workers, and they will stay for 3 or 5 years or somewhat longer, but eventually they have to return to their homes. And I think it will take Japanese a very long time to change their mindset about accepting foreigners to be permanent residents. I think there are about 15,000 a year now, and my suspicion is that most of them are foreign women marrying Japanese farmers. I understand that's not only a Japanese condition, it's happening in Korea as well. Japan is one of the lowest recipients of refugees, something like 15 to 25 a year out of the thousands that apply. Let me turn to aging. Aging is the happy result of Japan's economic development and advances in the standard of living. Of course, the proportion of older Japanese, 65 or older, is rising because of the low fertility rate, and actually at the present the absolute numbers of older people are rising. This is good news, because otherwise they'd be dead, right? I have a personal interest in this myself. So the sort of 20-year increase in life expectancy that Japan has achieved over the last 75 years or so is a great, wonderful thing. But it's also challenging. The challenge is, how does a society cope with having a higher proportion of older people? Part of the adjustment is that older people are working. A higher percentage of those aged 65 to 75 in Japan work than in the United States. But nonetheless, the costs and future costs are real concerns. I think Japan has a universal health care, and it's a very good program. I don't see them cutting back on elderly health care. They may try to pay for it by having higher fees for higher income Japanese. That would seem to me a quite reasonable sort of response. It's, of course, politically difficult to carry out that sort of thing. Retirement benefits that the government pays for people of elderly and welfare-related programs, there I think they're sustainable in the short to medium run, but not in the longer run. And so the question, as we know, is younger people paying, a smaller number of younger people paying to support a greater number of older people. And how this is going to be handled is not clear. I think eventually they will have to reduce the support for elderly people. But will be another terribly difficult political solution. Of course, as in Korea and everywhere else, the key to Japan's good economic performance in the future is to increase its productivity through R&D, innovation, better allocation of capital and labor sources. Two of the major issues relating to productivity are the operations of the Japanese labor markets and the increasing inequality of income and wealth. Japanese labor markets are segmented and quite rigid, with significant differences in wages plus the fringe benefits for full-time regular workers as compared to contract, part-time, and other non-regular workers that are about 40% of the labor force. I could speak for hours about the Japanese labor market, but I've been told to stop fairly soon. So let me just make two final points. First, small and medium enterprises, SMEs, in Japan are important and are, as producers, not only as suppliers to large firms, as subcontractors, but they provide goods and services to local and regional markets, and some are even as exporters. I'm always impressed by the local companies whenever I go to different parts of Japan every time I'm there, and the local companies that I meet are strong and good. And when I was in Miyazaki, I met Japan's largest shochu producer. I met a small domestic airline with 12 modern low-cost operating airplanes with its headquarters at the Miyazaki airport, and a company that is doing a special pancake mix business, which is being marketed as a kind of dessert item together with fruits and jams and ice cream and so forth, other toppings. And it's growing like mad. So for me, seeing this just helps me get a flavor of what's going on in Japan. I think Japan's SMEs have problems. My impression is Korean SMEs have greater problems. My other final point is that our attempts to measure GDP and GDP per person in Japan or Korea really doesn't adequately estimate the high value of services because of the nature of Korean society and Japanese society. I think everybody's brought up to just learn how to provide good service. It's not something that happens universally in America, I have to say. So when I talk about services, it's really a wide-ranging group. It ranges from professional services such as doctors or lawyers, business services including accounting and auditing, and consumer services such as retail or restaurants. And I think as wages go up in Japan and the costs of labor rise, stores, retail stores, restaurants will reduce their hours of service, and we're already seeing that. And they'll have fewer staff to serve in stores and restaurants. The quality of the service will be just as high, but it will be slower. So it's just going to take us more time to have a nice meal in Japan than it used to. So we as consumers will be paying that cost, but in measured GDP, productivity will be going up because there are fewer workers. So let me just conclude that by simply repeating that Japan is a normal, advanced country and a demographic leader because of its declining and older population. And we all can learn from how Japan deals with these problems and its other problems. Fundamentally, I continue to be quite optimistic about the Japanese economy. It will maintain its high standard of living and over time will gradually increase it. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here. It's been, I think, just about a year since Hugh and I have visited and had the opportunity to meet with all of you at this early hour in the morning. I always look forward to this trip because it's the one time I know that I'll be up before 6 o'clock in the morning. There's several things I want to talk about in a very brief amount of time about Trump and the situation in the United States. But let me start by saying just a few words about the relationship between Mr. Abe and Mr. Trump, which may actually be of some relevance to the fact to what's going to be happening at the end of this month when President Moon meets with Mr. Trump in Washington, because Abe has done a brilliant job, in my view, of handling Trump and building a personal relationship. About a week, as I understand it, about a week before the election, the U.S. ambassador got a message to the Trump camp that the Prime Minister would like to call him to congratulate him if he were elected. And Trump was tickled that the Prime Minister of Japan thought he might actually be elected, which I think Trump himself didn't expect. And within 24 hours after the election, Abe called, and again, from what I've been told, they didn't talk policy. They talked about golf. They talked about, or Abe talked about how Trump sort of personified the American dream, expression that Trump is very fond of, and in the conversation about golf, Abe said, you know, I like golf too, and it'd be wonderful to play sometime together. And Trump said, well, when you come to Washington, we'll go. Let's go down to Florida and play some golf. Apparently, that was when the decision was made to go to Mar-a-Lago after Washington. In any case, the point here is that Abe set as his initial goal, build a personal relationship, avoid talking about substantive, especially because Trump is not yet president. There still was Mr. Obama in the White House. And 10 days later, Abe was in Trump Tower to meet with Trump. Again, a very informal conversation with his daughter Ivanka and Jared Kushner, and at the time Mike Flynn, who was the incoming and then quickly outgoing head of the National Security Council. So he laid the groundwork for this relationship by taking this very personal approach and focusing on how do you build a personal rapport with the U.S. president, and it has paid very large dividends. As you know, in February when he met with Trump in Washington, and I think this is a very important point. Abe said absolutely nothing critical of U.S. policy. And for Trump, Theresa May had been there before Abe. She took a different position publicly at their joint press conference on sanctions on Russia. Merkel came later, and in a very testy meeting in which he refused to her offer to shake hands. So Trump was so pleased with Abe that, as you know, they shook hands and Trump wouldn't let go. Japanese newspaper reporters timed it, 19 seconds of this handshake, during which Abe's smile kind of froze into a grimace, froze and then metamorphosized into this kind of painful grimace till he got his hand loose. In Mar-a-Lago, they had 27 rounds of golf, lunches, and dinner. And from what I understand, and what I'm sure is true, Abe did most of the talking, and Trump was in a listening mode. And he talked about North Korea, about China, about how Japanese investment in manufacturing companies in the United States has created employment. And one thing about this peculiar man we have as president of our country is that for an extreme narcissist, which he is, you would think that he would surround himself with yes men who tell him how wonderful he is. But it's peculiar. I think it's interesting about Trump. He likes to surround himself with people with strong opinions. And he listens to them, And then he makes up his own mind. And then, of course, in the middle of the night, he changes his mind and sends out a Twitter feed saying something else. But that's another story. And so I think Abe did something. He just was, I thought, very clever in not talking down to Trump, but keeping Trump kind of talking up to Trump, but educating him. It was very successful. As you know, Abe came back to Japan with Trump having said not even one word, not the slightest echo of any of the criticisms he had made of Japan during the campaign. Nothing about Japan's free ride on defense spending. Nothing about currency manipulation and BOJ policy that has led to depreciation of the yen and increase in Japanese exports. Nothing about trade barriers. So it was a very successful visit. But I would just add this about Abe and about Japan. We learned, I think, something very important about the trip. For Japan, there is no option but to try to develop the closest possible relationship with the American president, whoever she or he might be. There is nothing to be gained. At least Japanese don't see anything to be gained from criticizing the U.S. president. So it's very different from America's European allies. And it reflects a big difference. You know, Germany, despite all the problems of the EU, Germany is in a region of democratic, economically advanced states, common values. Britain, after Brexit, is not part of the EU, but he's still part of that world. But look at Japan, and the same goes for Korea. Look at Japan. Who are its neighbors? China, North Korea, Russia, all autocracies, all with nuclear weapons. The only democracy in the neighborhood is right here in South Korea, with which Japan has a difficult relationship because of the problems that are left over from the way its poor handling of colonial era issues, comfort women, and so on and so forth. So I think there are two lessons that came from the Japanese. One is there is nothing to be gained from criticizing the United States. There is no option but to have a strong relationship with the United States. There is no way to maintain a balance in East Asia without a strong U.S. presence in Asia. But Abe is not putting all his eggs in the U.S. basket. I think we see in Japan now a comprehensive foreign policy strategy. The U.S. alliance is at the center, but Japan is working hard to develop security relationships with Australia, with Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam, Philippines, with India, trying to see if they can come to some accord with Putin on Northern Ireland's issue. Now changing its tune about One Belt, One Road and indicating Japanese interest in participating in this Chinese project. So I think we see a kind of hedging strategy, maybe not a hedging strategy, but a strategy that we have to be one, to supplement, not to put, as I said, not to depend entirely on the alliance, but to develop other relations, both economic and security, and to be prepared in case they get blindsided by Trump's erratic behavior. And we saw him being very critical of Germany. Germany is bad, very bad, because of its trade policy and the deficit that the U.S. runs on the trade account with Germany. But you know, the U.S.-Japan trade relationship is not very different from the U.S.-German one. So there's always a chance of being blindsided. But so far, I think Abe has handled it's handled Trump well, and Trump calls Shinzo fairly regularly. So that's for that. Now let me turn to the two issues I want to talk about. One is what's the current status? What can we expect of this Trump administration? And secondly, and the most important question, why did he win? I think it's we need to constantly think about what has driven American politics to into a situation in which the American public decided to elect this unqualified demagogue as president of our country. But first about this administration. He's been in office now for 5 months. You would think, and I had thought, and I had hoped, that 5 months into by 5 months, we would see the situation start calming down and sort of more systematic and predictable behavior take place. It is as chaotic as on day one. And I think you should expect it to remain that way. He will continue to use his Twitter feed to create all kinds of problems. He's serious about changing many aspects of American foreign policy. He meant it when he said the U.S. was going to get out of TPP. He meant it when he said we were going to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. We should not have false hope that somehow the mainstream voices of common sense will capture this president and point him in a more conventional direction. He won't be able to, it's not a revolution, he won't be able to fundamentally change the country, thank goodness. In our country, I think the system of checks and balances still operates. We see what the courts have done to Trump's efforts to prevent immigration from Muslim majority countries. We see the problems he is having and will continue to have to get repeal and the replacement of the health care, so-called Obamacare, because of opposition from within his own Republican Party in the Senate. So the checks and balances system will keep him from doing some things that he wants to do. But this is a time of quite dramatic change in American policy. One issue of concern is that 5 months after becoming president, it's not unusual for a lot of political appointee positions not to have been filled. But never in our history have there been fewer top-level political appointees unappointed, not yet appointed, as in this government. Of the top 550 leadership positions in the U.S., in the U.S. government, only 29 have been confirmed by the Senate as of this morning. 29 out of 550. Only another 70 or 80 names have actually been put forth. So whether it be Mark's the State Department, where after I think there's only 1 or 2 top people that have been appointed, or Defense, or Environmental Protection Agency, and all the others, they are not staffed up to run a government. And you cannot run a government by a few people, by the president and his family in the White House thinking they're doing it. It's not a family business. It's not like you know, it's not Trump's real estate operation. But that's the way, so far, he's running it. So this is a matter, I think, of great concern, and it creates great concern around the world about the reliability, the credibility, the sustainability of American policy. So we hope that things will calm down. But today, later today, former FBI Director Comey is going to be testifying in the Senate. His initial presentation has already been put on the Senate website. It's going to keep this issue about Russian interference in the U.S. election, and the question of whether there was conspiracy between Trump camp and Russia, very much on the front pages of the newspapers. And Trump's reaction will be to react, not to just let it try to quietly leave it alone, but to overreact. It's a very worrisome thing. So, I think what's most important to reflect on is that Trump's election, put it this way, why did this man get elected? I don't believe for a minute that it was because the majority of the people who voted for him are racist, are homophobic, are Islamophobic, or you name it, as Hillary Clinton said, a rant that I think did a lot to cost her the election. He won because so many Americans, especially working class people in the so-called Midwest, Rust Belt, but around the country, are frustrated and they're angry. And they blame the establishment in Washington for not paying attention to their economic concerns and not doing what needs to be done to deal with the negative consequences of globalization. Yes, globalization is something we have to. It's good for the world. It's good for the economy. But there are sectors of the economy that pay the price of the adjustment. They pay the price of a company moving from Wisconsin to Mexico or to China or to Bangladesh. And the U.S. does less in the way of trade adjustment assistance than any other advanced country in terms of job retraining programs, helping people move to other parts of the country where the growth rate is high. So I think the problem is not globalization. The problem is the failure to deal with the negative consequences of a globalizing economy. And I suspect that's true for all our advanced countries, including the one we're sitting in today. Hillary Clinton blames her defeat on FBI Director Comey and the email issue, on Russian hacking, and on the fact that she's a woman and there's still prejudice against electing a woman as president in the United States. But that isn't why she lost, I don't believe. She lost because she was an inept candidate. I remember last year when I spoke here, I said I didn't think Hillary Clinton could win this election if she ran a campaign about how dangerous it would be to elect Donald Trump as president. She has to have a positive message. She never had a positive message. She never had a positive message, and she never went after the traditional Democratic Party base, which was always been working class, middle class people. When towards the end of the election campaign, when I thought there was a real chance that she might lose, the clinching thing for me was I think it was her final rally, in which I don't know, it had lots of people at in the auditorium, and she was joined on stage by Beyonce, Katy Perry, Jay-Z, all these celebrities, and they were having a grand time, and so were the people in the audience. And I was thinking, if you're a man in Ohio who had lost his job and you're watching TV with your family and just looking at this rally, what will you think? You'll think, this lady lives in a world so different from mine, and she's not concerned with my issues. And Donald Trump, with his Make America Great Again baseball cap on, talking at these huge rallies about how the problem is immigrants and liberals. Yeah, to people who are angry and frustrated, they may not really be against immigrants and liberals, but they sure are against so-called limousine liberals. This is an expression in English which I think is very apt. Limousine liberals. These people who run the Democratic Party in the United States, that drive around in chauffeur-driven limousines, hang out with their hedge fund friends. One of the interesting things in American developments in American politics is how many younger, very rich Americans support the Democratic Party. And they support the Democratic Party because they're social liberals. They believe in climate control, in gay rights, in better treatment for minorities, and so on. While it may be Republican, but their heart is Democrat. And these are people who, in a way, have captured this party, especially because you need so much money to be in politics these days. And who has the money? Well, the people who have the money are the people that in the month of August, I don't want to go on too long with this, but the more I always start my talks about Trump. I've been giving a lot of speeches in Japan. I always start my talks being very critical of Trump, and then halfway through, it's just as happening now, my anger at the Democratic Party, which I've been a supporter of all my life, my anger at the Democratic Party overwhelms me, and I spend the whole rest of the time being critical of the party. But let me just say one final word. In the month of August, while Donald Trump was running around having these big rallies and making these outrageous proposals about not letting Muslims into the country and so forth and so on, Hillary Clinton spent the whole month in the Hamptons on Long Island having fundraising dinners every night with her buddies, with her friends, and using that money mostly for TV advertising, which was the strategy for winning this election. And towards the end of the campaign, her husband, Bill Clinton, told her campaign manager, you got to get Hillary to go out into the Midwest, go to Wisconsin. She never visited Wisconsin once after getting the nomination. Go to these blue-collar areas. She needs to go. And the reaction was, yeah, Bill Clinton, that's old-style Democratic politics. We're in a new world, a world of identity politics. That's the problem. It's not, you know, at the end of the day, people vote their pocketbook. They vote their economic interests. It was Bill Clinton who said it's the economy, stupid, but his wife didn't listen. So I think you'd be making a big mistake to think that Trump is simply an aberration, and when he's gone, which sooner or later he will be, that we'll revert to the norm. We're not going back to the U.S., to the America that we used to know in many important ways. If it's not Donald Trump, perhaps the next president will be a populist on the left rather than a populist on the right. We have to come to grips with our domestic problems. The fact that the U.S. has the highest level of economic inequality among all the advanced industrialized world. The fact that, as I said, support for people who lose out in the globalization race are not being paid attention to. And we have to come to grips with the reality that American attitudes about our country's role in the world is changing. I think the era in which America saw it in its national interests to be magnanimous in maintaining a liberal international order is at an end. We're not feeling so generous anymore. We're feeling that other countries should be doing more. We're not used to, in our history, this kind of a situation. Before the war, we were isolationists. After the war, we became globalists with unparalleled power. We're still the most powerful country in the world and will continue to be, but it's not the kind of power, especially in economic terms, that we once had. So you look in this part of the world, what country is the major trading partner of every country in East Asia? It's China. It's not the United States. So I think we're seeing Trump being representing something very fundamental in the way of changing attitudes in the United States. Unfortunately, in my view, he is not competent to be president, but we're stuck with him. And I suspect that he will be, president for 4 years. A lot of some wishful thinking about impeachment and so on. Not very likely, unless something comes out of this Russia investigation that would lead to that, which I think is unlikely. Now, here in East Asia, one thing I think that can be said that's positive about Donald Trump, I don't believe he has any strategy, but his tactics, his threats about dealing with this North Korean problem, if the Chinese don't do something about it, they come across as pretty credible. And I think we've seen at least some real concern in Beijing that they have to do more to work with the US, with South Korea, with Japan, to try to dissuade, to get the North Koreans to cease and desist from the continued development of their nuclear weapons. So I think President Moon's visit to Washington is absolutely critical. And I hope that he can sort of do an Abe in the sense of build a personal relationship with Trump, express his support and appreciation for what the U.S. is trying to do to put pressure on North Korea, and then have a very clear message about what he wants Trump to understand South Korea would like to see us do together. We need a strategic agreement between the U.S. and South Korea as to how to deal with North Korea. So I think I'm going to stop here and leave time for questions, but this perhaps gives you a little bit of an idea of how I see the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hugh Patrick and Gerald Curtis. Talked about data issues that have direct relevance to our situations, especially just prior to President's visit to the U.S. Without much further ado, I'd like to open the floor for questions. Do I see any hands? Well, Professor Hugh Patrick can touch on the issues that are very relevant to us as well, such as low fertility and aging, low productivity, and regular workers versus irregular workers, which the current government tries to, some of which, all of which actually, the current government is trying to come up with some solutions. And of course, Professor Curtis' speech on what it means to us, how we understand the Trump administration, what it means for us now and after Trump's term. I think it's very interesting and relevant. Yes,
Well, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. One question for Professor Patrick and another question for Professor Curtis. Professor Patrick, you mentioned about the Japanese SME. And I know that Japanese SME is very powerful and they produce a number of the global hidden champions. So my question is that what is the relationship between Japanese SMEs and their large conglomerate? How their relationship between big company and SMEs? I know that they have some very positive relationship, transactions, and so forth. But in Korea, we do have very zero-sum type of relationship between big conglomerate and SMEs. So actually, the work I'm doing is that how to nurture collaboration between big companies and SMEs. Many of the Korean big companies try to penetrate the standard business lines, which used to be dominated by traditional SME and micro family business, etc. So, do you observe that sort of the penetration of large business into a traditional sort of the micro family business area in Japan? That's my first question. And this question also, you did mention about the TPP. Mr. Trump pulled out of the TPP, and I know that Mr. Abe is trying to push TPP forward without the U.S. membership. So I know that the Japanese work with Australia and New Zealand and so on. So do you think that the TPP minus the U.S. is essentially coming back, and if that becomes mature, maybe Trump might decide to join TPP later on? Maybe this question also goes to the Professor Curtis. And my second question is that as Mr. Trump, adopting America First policy and spread the TPP and Paris Pact, so on, and if retreat from the Asia, and then China appears to take the great advantage of the U.S. upsets. Okay? Now, this is maybe the Chinese leadership is more visible, and President Xi Jinping is that, okay, China is ready to rewrite new trade rules. But I think the American general, the blue collar workers, they are not aware of the globalization. So the U.S. Political leadership will allow for Chinese rise in Asian affairs as the leader. So it's coming through, or maybe Trump might change the idea later on.
Yeah. I'd like to ask questions to you and Mr. Patrick as well. Japan's unemployment rate is very low. As you said, it's 2.8%. But then they have this problem of statement wage problem. Do you think Japan will be able to see a wage growth in the near future? And for Mr. President, well, the U.S. has just put out the Paris Climate Accord, leaving the global leadership back in this area. Do you think China will be able to fulfill that?
Let me start. First, I think 20, 30 years ago, there was a big tension in Japan between small companies that were suppliers of large companies. And large companies were generally perceived as exploiting their strong power. My sense is that over time, that issue has sort of gradually declined. Small enterprises that are supplying Toyota or other large firms have worked out good working relationships, and it's less of an economic or social issue. But it took time. The other issue is, of course, other SME confined markets that are too small for large companies to bother with. That's true for specific local markets, local services, things of that sort. And it takes time to sort this out. My impression is that Korea is still at a much earlier stage of this. It's more of a problem. So that when I said there are good, strong SMEs in Japan, that's certainly true. But there are also lots of zombie SMEs. And they stay alive basically because interest rates are very low, and banks don't want to make them go bankrupt because they charge cause problems for banks. So that when interest rates go up, then there's going to be a lot of problems with just the SME side. On TPP, I think it was a major mistake for the United States to decide not to participate. My impression is that in Washington, the trade policy people who are still there are trying to figure out how do you take the substance of many TPP issues and incorporate them in new discussions. And so part of it is take the substance, call it a different name, but continue with the same. And if that works out well, then maybe there will be a new Trump public policy on trade, and probably not be called TPP, because even though Trump's name is T. But that's possible. But I'm not going to bet on it. Right? I think we simply have to see how trade negotiations go. One of the issues is important countries are not at TPP level, and what's about that? It's been a surprise to me because I was trained around the standard economics way in which that labor became really tight. The market for hiring people became so the way you competed was you had to raise wages to get workers. What has happened apparently is that regular workers and unions are really concerned about continuing the system of more or less guaranteed employment, and so they're quite conservative about asking for wage increases. On the other hand, the non-regular workers, who are sort of 40% of the labor force, you do see much more labor market wage increases that are beginning to show themselves in the economy. I think that this is a process in which wages will gradually continue to rise. I think it's just beginning, but I think it will persist. And in that sense, I'm really optimistic.
So, first a word about the TPP. First, Hugh said that he wouldn't place any bets on the U.S. coming back to TPP or what might happen. Well, I placed my bet on the U.S. not coming back to TPP as long as Donald Trump is president of the United States. He will not change his view on this issue. Other interestingly, he has changed his own view on TPP 11. After the U.S. pulled out, he said there was no point in going forward with TPP without the United States. Now he's taken a very different position and trying to find a way for Japan to exercise leadership in East Asia as contrasted with China. For Japan to be a leader in East Asia and building a free, sort of sustaining the free trade regime. As you know, the big issue, the big problem is TPP 11 includes Vietnam and Malaysia, both of which want to be in TPP because of the access it would have provided to the U.S. market. So whether TPP 11 is going to go forward or not, I'm not sure. But clearly the Japanese view is that let's at least keep the momentum going behind TPP and wait for Trump to change his mind and come back. It amazes me how much Japanese have convinced themselves that this is a real possibility. As I said, I don't think it's a possibility at all. So what Trump will is we really don't know very much about what he's going to do. Like I said, it's just been appointed. How much influence he has vis-a-vis people like Navarro and Steve Bannon in the White House, it's all very, very, very uncertain. But I think the Japanese have made it clear to the Americans. Agricultural liberalization, which is a big issue for the U.S. with Japan, that Japan is prepared to make the concessions on agriculture that it has already made in the TPP. But if that is what the U.S. wants, that negotiation can happen very quickly. But if the U.S. wants more than what TPP, what Japan gave in the TPP negotiations, then the negotiations will drag on for a long time. In the meantime, Australia will capture the market for imported beef, and in many other ways the U.S. will lose out. So I think the Japanese have taken a strong position. They're willing to liberalize on agriculture, but only up to the TPP level. One other thing about the economy, the politics of the economic relationship, which I find very interesting, is that the U.S. and Japan agreed to set up this bilateral economic dialogue headed by Pence and Hustle. Hustle not only fighting, not being fighting, not because he's finance minister, because he's vice premier. And this was, from what I know, and I'm sure this information I have is correct, this was Abe's proposal, which Trump at first was reluctant to accept. One, he couldn't figure out what was his vice president doing, heading up a bilateral dialogue on the economy. But it was clear what Abe was after. They wanted Pence. They wanted two things. They wanted a dialogue that focused on strengthening economic cooperation rather than a dialogue that focused on the things on the disputes, on trade conflict. And they wanted Pence to be the key person because as governor of Indiana, he had been very successful in attracting a lot of Japanese investment from Toyota and other companies. And so they see Pence as friendly with Japan. And most importantly, and this is fits in well with the Japanese strategy that we're all familiar with, economic dialogue would kick the can down the road in terms of dealing with trade disputes. And that's exactly what happened. Pence showed up in Tokyo, no staff, no preparation, not able to do very much more than offer some very anodyne comments about how this is a vital trading relationship and one we cherish. That was music to Japanese ears. So I don't think we should expect turning back towards an emphasis on multilateral trade agreements by this government. Now, this question and some question about China really is the same question about whether China is going to fill kind of a vacuum that Trump has created, pulling out of the Paris Accord, saying he's not the leader of the world, he's the leader of the United States. His interests are America first. That means to throw away, to give up the kind of role the U.S. has played since the end of the Second World War. Will China fill this? This is clearly an opportunity for China to take a major leadership role in the world. Will they succeed in doing so? I'm very dubious. First on Paris. I think it's important. This is not about China. But on the Paris Accord, it's important to realize that Trump's decision is widely opposed in the United States by many state governors and by many corporations who are banding together to try to maintain the U.S. commitment at the state level and at the corporate level to the agreement made in Paris. So the fact that Trump has pulled out of the agreement does not mean that America has really pulled out of its commitment to do its role, to do what it should be doing to try to contribute to controlling climate change. So I think it was a terrible decision, which just hurts the American image, American credibility, and American leadership. But I would be a little careful about its implications because of the immediate reactions of several state governors saying, California, Washington State, and elsewhere, that we will keep the commitments of the agreements alive. But as to China, I'd really be interested in your views. But I think it's very difficult for China to exercise this kind of leadership role. Leadership means that people they respect what you're doing, that they respect your political system, that they respect the way you treat foreign companies. And does China enjoy that kind of respect? I don't think so. I don't think the country with an authoritarian regime that rejects values of freedom and of true market economy, human rights, is that a world leader? We may be a leader of other countries that have that share those values. I don't see it being a leader of our countries. I think that the government, the Chinese government to stop a lot of tourism to South Korea, hate root stores, and to punish Lotte in China because of that they mix this government security issue with their treatment of foreign investors in their country and the way they manipulate their own interests. Is this the behavior that is acceptable from the leader of the world? I don't believe that for a minute. So I think we face, in a way, even a more challenging situation. We're in a world in which there is no one leader. And so the question is, how do we create a more cooperative form of collegial form of leadership? This is very difficult to do. We're now into a multipolar world rather than the old bipolar Cold War system. A multipolar world in which the dangers of miscalculation, the different combinations that become possible are so complex that the opportunities for conflict grow greater. So the U.S. is the strongest country, but we have to learn, I think, we have to learn how to listen, how to work with other countries, with Japan, with Korea, in this part of the world, in particular, to come up with a joint strategic view of how to serve our mutual national interests. We don't have much experience with this. In our view of alliance cooperation is we'll decide in Washington what needs to be done, and then we'll consult with our allies about how to share the burden of doing it. That's not the way things can work as much in the future as they have in the past. So I don't see China as the leader that's going to replace the U.S. I don't see the U.S. reverting to the norm and becoming once again the leader it was before Deng Xiaoping, before the collapse of Russia. So that's the challenge. How do we figure out together how to provide leadership and not have a situation in which China, not providing leadership, can gain things that are not in our interest.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the floor? Settle?
To sum up, President Trump will be here for at least the next 4 years. Although there are some possibility of impeachment, but as James said, the probabilities. And also, China is not really capable of answering this. So what that leaves us is the danger of what's called integrated threat. And that is that the existing hegemonic power is the power is economic and that continue to play the global leadership. On the other hand, the new emerging leadership countries are ready to play the global leadership role. So the world will be in short supply of liquidity. And that gives us really a gloomy situation. Okay, as Jerry and you said, it's a big challenge, but good a solution. So I, for one, have been advocating doing something collectively. One of the forums I can think of is G20. This world is often described as G0 world or no-polar world or multipolar world. It's actually no-polar world or zero. So the world needs a collective leadership, and one of the possible forums is G20. But I've been involved in the G20 process from the very beginning. in Abu very disappointed by the performance of G20 because no country takes ownership in accepting leadership. Someone has to collect the leadership, so they have to collect the leadership, but no one does that. So on that ground, I've been recommending for the government indirectly, Korea can play the role. According to my experience, I work very well with the U.S. I work very well with China. I work very well with the European partners. When I went to China, I met with one to sell, and I met 6 times during the course of 1 year with the next 7 in the White House. And John Hollis and Gordon Brown's office, John W. DeVito's office, France. So I think country like Korea, which is not superpower and has an uncertain local power, so we can, but we have enough weight, like other countries, which can play the try to play a role, but so Korea can play. So coming to G20, I hope our president plays a role. So what's your the you and Terence Richard point?
Let me say, I agree with you completely about trying to utilize the G20 as an effective operation. And as you say, so long it's not done as much as it should. And that's where countries like Korea, Australia, or others that have the intellectual capacity and leadership capacity. And so I hope that you will do that. I wanted to make one different point, which is generally when we're talking about the difficulties, we're talking about geopolitical difficulties, security issues. But at the same time, we have a great strength in our international economic system, in our trade system. And this is always provides a sort of a reality that is cooperative and productive and important. And we have to be very careful not to let creeping protectionism come in the United States or Korea or Japan or anywhere. So we have to don't take a good operating economy for granted. The political side as political leaders take it as something that you have to also protect as one of the strengths as we try to figure out how to cooperate with each other.
I very much appreciate what you said. I agree. I think there is potentially an important role for South Korea in G20, and there should be a greater role for the G20. But I don't know, maybe I'm just a skeptical loser, but I'm rather skeptical about how much the G20 can do as kind of the steering of the world issue. So I think the steering kind of the direction to deal with world issues. I think we need to do what we can to strengthen the G20. I think Korea is in almost a uniquely advantageous position to play a role. But I think we need to think about how do you build kind of issue-specific coalitions among countries that have common concerns about some set of issues, and try to figure out how to come up with a common strategic approach to deal with them. The G20 is so diverse that on most issues you're not going to get that kind of consensus. So, you take this issue of North Korea, it's quite clear we need to have a common strategy of the U.S., South Korea, Japan, and hopefully China to deal with this North Korea issue. And so I think, depending on the issues we're talking about, there are different coalitions. It's very complex and therefore easy to fail, but I think that's really where we need to give some more intellectual, use our imagination more to figure out about how do you structure these kinds of issues.
I totally agree with Mr. President's remarks. Personally, I went through the priority agendas of the G20, upcoming G20, and I was quite disappointed because the number of agenda that they're trying to cover is way too many, and too diverse, too many spread out. So I wonder how much the G20, upcoming G20 can come up with and can come up with for the world economy. And like Professor Curtis said, even though there is too many agendas, there is a role for Korea to play, as we did in the previous G20 summits. And I think it's very hard time for the Korean president at this time to reaffirm, to persuade the G20 and some leaders to reaffirm the spirit of anti-protectionism and sensitive. And but then I also see the leadership lacking in the G20 summit.
Let me ask you, as you casual observer from the United States, we know this area so well, and particularly Japan and Korea. The issue that how one can see this issue, and particularly from your perspective, you know, we have some discussions going on this sad issue, and I'm very curious to share your opinion. All the Americans' reactions and views on this issue. How do you see it?
Well, first, I think ordinary Americans have no idea what that is, and their reaction would be, "What's that?" So, but I think the bigger question is, what do Americans think about North Korea developing its missile capability to deliver atomic weapons, not only to South Korea and Japan, but potentially to the United States with an ICBM capability? And the response is, we have to stop. And so, in that context, building ballistic missile defenses in South Korea and Japan, I think is seen as common sense by people who think about these issues. Whether it be that or some other kind of system is kind of a technical question that most people don't care about. But I think there's two things. One, that we have to try to develop a defense system, and we need to put pressure on North Korea to persist, and that if China wants, and as Trump has said, if Chinese have the only country that has the ability to really squeeze the North Koreans hard enough because of oil, and I think it's kind of foolish to say, you help us on North Korea and we're going to be nice to you on trade issues, which is in Trump's line. But anyway, the short answer to your question is, I think there's a lot of support for those principles. And the point of course, if the Chinese are so upset about their deployment in South Korea, it's quite it's quite obvious what they need to do to prevent that. That is to get the North Koreans to give up their nuclear weapons. If you didn't have the nuclear weapon problem in North Korea, you wouldn't have that missile defense in South Korea. So instead of blaming Lotte for giving the land to the Japanese, to the Korean government to build the system, look in the mirror. It's the Chinese it's a Chinese problem to deal with the North Koreans and the North Koreans.
I was really surprised that the Chinese responded by attacking a single company with investments in China. I think the Chinese have been trying very hard to demonstrate to the world the separation of politics and economics, and that they would treat foreign investment reasonably. So they've sent a major signal that they're not a reliable country to invest in. So I was quite surprised about that. The broader issue of what to do about North Korea, that becomes a symbol among those of us who have heard what that is. And as Jimmy said, not many Americans know the details of that. But just one component of a comprehensive military strategy. How do you try to contain North Korea? I am skeptical that the Chinese will push North Korea far enough. I don't expect North Korea to be nuclearized. The American government policy dilemma is that it will not accept the idea that North Korea is a nuclear power officially. Yes, it may accept that reality in practice, but it cannot officially. So it's a very difficult adjustment process we have to do in American official policy, because I think the reality is there's going to be a nuclear, military capable nation within a few years, and I don't see any way that's going to be stopped.
Okay, lastly, yes.
I don't want to lose this opportunity to ask this question. I want to ask on the fate of the Korea-US free trade agreement. Donald Trump, during the election campaign, he said that the Chorus FTA is really the deal. He's ready scrapping the deal, or at least renegotiate the deal. So how do you see this prospect? I mean, Chorus FTA has been viewed as a gold standard, and Trump is shifting from multilateralism to a bilateralism. Therefore, Chorus FTA somehow must be preserved and must be enhanced. That's my view. But what Korea should take the preparatory works to prevent any possible collapse of Chorus FTA or
Really just here to say, why don't you establish a Korea-U.S. economic dialogue and include discussion of course in the dialogue and play for time. Wait and see, I think, is the best strategy to dealing with this administration. We have no idea what the Trump administration's view is going to be 6 months from now, or even next week. But surely 6 months or a year from now, you don't know. So what I think is probably most useful is to engage in the dialogue, keep the dialogue at a fairly general and comprehensive level, talk about what American dissatisfactions or Trump's dissatisfactions with Chorus are, talk about how they might be resolved. Talking can take an awfully long time. The longer it takes, the better it is.
Lastly, if you are asked to give advice or some tips to President Moon going to the States, what advice would you give?
Why are you asking?
Yes.
Well, I think it's very important to try to identify clearly what your priorities are. If you're talking on the economic side, you really want to think about policies that promote efficiency and effective allocation and full use of resources resources. I think that the government always has an important role, but employment is in the private sector. And to hire a few thousand more people in the public sector strikes me as not the most opportunistic way to go. You should be thinking of more fundamental, longer-run problems to increase the growth rate, to increase the demand for labor, and work through those sorts of things. So this is a reference to this very specific proposal about trying to change, to increase the number of government officials and change them from temporary to permanent workers. Those are very complex issues. They're nice slogans, but I like Jerry's solution. Have a dialogue, which means you change nothing. You talk and you talk and you talk. And that's when you deal with difficult issues, say, with a difficult president, namely President Trump, not President Clinton. I don't think he would be a difficult president. But for me, this is also a new government with a new leadership. So it takes time to find out what this government would really like. As an economist, I give it rather standard economic.
Well, I think I said a little bit in my presentation about the visit to Washington. I think the key to the so presenters and offer advice is first focus on the person, focus on developing a good personal rapport. Focus on infrastructure. Assume that Trump really doesn't know a lot about issues that are important to Korea, and try to find a way first to appreciate what the U.S. is doing for this country, and try to take the opportunity to educate him without being condescending. That's the trick. I think, as I said, that was what Abe pulled off very well. And I think the president can too, and set up some kind of a system for a continuing value, not simply to push the issues off forever, because on North Korea we cannot push them off. But they're not going to be resolved on June 28th either, when he's in Washington. But you have to, as I said before, it seems to me we need some structure to create a strategic agreement on how to proceed. And we have to be prepared, I think, to think, so, as we say, outside the box about how to deal with this North Korean issue. And we don't have any more time, so I won't go on about it. But I do think that it's very important to have strong sanctions to make it clear to the Chinese that we need them and insist on their participating. But at the same time, there has to be an exit ramp. There has to be incentives for the North Koreans to engage in a process leading towards denuclearization. Sanctions alone will simply drive the North Koreans to take an even tougher position. I think back 1941, when the U.S. imposed sanctions on Japan in the summer of 1941, and then Prime Minister Konoe sent a message to Washington that he wanted to meet with Franklin Roosevelt in Hawaii to come to a resolution, peaceful resolution. And the reaction in Washington was, we can't be deceived by these militaries. And so we rejected the summit meeting and imposed sanctions on high-octane fuel exports to Japan. And within a week, on December 1st, they made the decision to attack Pearl Harbor. And that history doesn't repeat itself, but there are lessons here about the need to combine strong sanctions with incentives. If we just do one without the other, whether it be incentives without the sanctions or sanctions without the incentives, we're going to fail, as we failed in the last decade.
you very much, Professor Patrick and Curtis. The discussion was so interesting and I think it was already passed. Well, without much further ado, I'd like to thank you both and participants for sharing your ideas and notes. And it's always a pleasure to have you here, and we'd like to have you back soon.